Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Holy Shift podcast. Here we go, back again.
Let's do it.
How you guys
We're
doing?
here.
Your
your mic
face.
cut out a little bit. I was
Your
seeing if
face
Joe
just
Allen
looked
heard it.
filled with such disappointment.
All right, we're doing it again. Stirring up
Episode 5.
controversy. This one is about tithing. Now, I'll go ahead and say this. It might be controversial, but see, I didn't think it would be, but I can see now, based off of like some Facebook debates we've seen and stuff, how it's going to be pretty controversial. But I almost didn't even want to do this topic because, like, to me, it doesn't matter. I guess I'll just go ahead and start us off with some conversation here. It doesn't matter what somebody wants to do with their money to me. Like, if you want to give 10% of your money to the church, that's perfectly fine. Like, you can do that. If you want to spend 10% of your money playing the lotto, like, that makes no difference to me. I mean, you can, even if you want to cash out 10% in $1 bills and set it afire in your backyard and dance around it in the nude, whatever you want to do, I don't care. So I was thinking, this is not really something that I want to spend too much time talking about. But then I did think about the fact that this is an area where people get manipulated.
Mm-hmm.
I remember specific instances in church where I have heard the pastor say things like, it doesn't matter if you're a Christian, if you're not paying tithes, you are going to end up in hell. I've heard you can be a Christian, and if you're not paying tithes, you're going to be cursed. And one of the craziest things I've ever heard is the offering plate was going around, and this was not that long ago. The offering plate was going around, and the pastor said something along the lines of, just remember, Ananias and Sapphira were killed for not paying their tithes.
Good Lord.
Which is that is a straight up lie, which is actually what Ananias and Sapphira were killed for.
Yeah, touche.
So, I mean, whenever the conversation shifts to, those are threats, basically. Like, pay your tithes or else something bad is going to happen to you. That's manipulation, and that's just trying to strike fear into people. So that's why I think we do need to talk about this. I think this conversation, I think this conversation could be healthy and maybe have an impact on somebody who's living in fear like that or struggling financially and wondering, am I going to have to keep paying tithes? Like, what's the deal with this? So, should be a good conversation.
I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do my best to keep it healthy, and this topic really fires me up. So,
all right. So let's just
get it on.
Let's do it. So, what has been you guys' experience with tithing?
Start us off, Wood.
Well, growing up, ever since I had my first job, or if I was working on the weekends helping out my grandpa, any money I got, I was made to give 10%. So, you don't get much already, like you're a kid. You want to go spend your money on whatever you want, And so growing up, like I said, I was having to give every time. Every paycheck I
give
got.
it at church?
Yeah, every
Give
time
the offering.
Right. And if I recall correctly, it was before taxes, if I'm not mistaken. So like it wasn't what my paycheck ended up being after taxes. It was before taxes. So I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's how it was.
That's an interesting
Yeah.
thought there.
But as far as like, and I mean, I gave, we haven't been to church a lot up here in North Carolina, but we were going when we moved down to Gainesville, and up until I'd say probably about eight. Well, we've been up here 8 years, so up until about 9 or 10 years ago, I was given tithes, and even if I didn't have enough money to cover the rest of what I needed till my next paycheck was deposited. So when I moved down to Gainesville, Lainey and I were going to church still, and whether it be we were sending money back to our home church or the church we were attending in Gainesville, we were still giving. And she was a full-time student at University of Florida, and I was the only income, not making much money at all. I mean, we were newlyweds, and I was making $10-something an hour, $11, and we had an apartment, both of our cars, groceries, and even back then, 2011, 12, 13, I mean, apartments were still pretty high, especially for a bigger city like that. And we were both talking about this the other day whenever I told her that we were going to be talking about tithes. But we were both saying how every 2 weeks when I would get paid, we would literally be walking around Walmart or the local grocery store waiting for my check to hit so we could get groceries because we didn't have enough money. We weren't going to ask our family for money because, we felt like if we did, we would kind of be failing because we chose to get married while she was in school and we didn't want to have to ask for help. And that was almost every paycheck. We would have to wait in the store till 10 o'clock at night, whenever, to be able to afford our groceries.
And you're still paying tithes at that time?
Yes. And they say, you'll be blessed, giving tithes, you'll be blessed, the whole saying. And honestly, I can never recall a moment where I felt like, I don't really know how to word it without sounding like we weren't blessed, but nothing just really stands out. Like, I never got a check for a certain amount of money that I was needing or anything like that.
Like no special intervention or something like that?
No.
Like you kind of expect from a blessing?
Right.
What you're saying?
And I don't know. I mean, it's to live your life, I guess, based off something like that. And then, I don't know, it's especially when you don't make much money at all to begin with,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I know some choices people make, whether it be buying a new car or something like that. I mean, we were both driving used cars, old cars, it's not like we were out with brand new vehicles and stuff like that. Or just spending our money in ways that we shouldn't have been. I mean, really, other than groceries, gas, we weren't really, if we were doing anything on the weekend, it was free. I mean, we weren't going out to eat or anything like that, but we moved up here once she graduated. Never
balling.
never tithed again. And I don't know. I mean,
So you're
I got a
saying
lot of
that your experience would kind of be the opposite of what people say while you're tithing. It kind of felt like your life was cursed now that you've stopped. Obviously, circumstances have changed. You know, you both have much
right.
better jobs now and things, but it's kind of a reverse roles than what people present it to be.
I would say yeah. Um, and I had a thought whenever you started talking, and I can't remember right off, but yeah,
Bro
Sorry, I've been
ruined
sitting
it.
here too long.
nah. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't think it should. I don't know. It's just crazy to, there's, especially with jobs like now, people making, I mean, people make more money now. But if you gave 10%, you know, I don't know. I'll let y'all talk for a little bit, but I need
Yeah,
to.
so I guess we probably all have a similar understanding. I guess maybe we should say, if you're listening to this, you don't really have any church background. Tithing is the expectation that if you go to church, 10% of your income belongs to God. It's not 10%, uh, if you have it left over, like it's supposed to be the first fruits, so to speak, right there. 10% off the top goes to God, and then you make it work with the 90%. And similar experience. Well, I guess actually polar opposite experience. We had those moments of like blessing occur, and they've continued to occur long after we quit tithing. So it is not based off of our giving. Like we've had people come give us money, or like, what are we gonna do? Because when we first got married, we had no bills. The only debt we had was my little car that I had. So our rent was nothing because we were living, renting from a family member. I mean, we had a lot of money. I mean, not a lot of money, but a lot of profit, and we blew through it all. Like 10% was nothing to us to give away. Like it wasn't sacrificial or anything at all. And then our first son, Cole's born, and Joanna stays home with him. Our income's cut in half, and that's when things started to get real. And like we were still very active givers. Like at one point, I mean, the percentage is high, the amount was not high, so don't misunderstand. But at one point, I was giving away 33% of my income.
Wow.
Yeah, because I thought, it was all about blessing. And I know so earlier today I asked Chat GPT about tithing, and I sent you guys its response about one of the dangers is it can make your relationship with faith transactional. And I think looking back, um, that was probably somewhat of the case. Like I thought that, like I just read books like George Mueller. This guy prayed in every dime he ever got, and then so like that was my mindset. Like I wanted to be like that. And then you read like Crossing Switchblade, David Wilkerson praying all the money in for Teen Challenge and stuff. I was like, I thought this was what I was supposed to do, and there would be times like money didn't show up. There'd be times that something crazy would happen, and I would just toss it up to, well, I guess this is not God. Like I was trying to go to Bible school, and I was going to pray in every dime for the tuition, and it
I
didn't happen.
remember
So I didn't go.
that.
It's just like, yeah, like, but I mean, growing up, it was just the same. I mean, the same spiel, give or else. The verses
Yeah.
in Malachi, you're robbing God. You're cursed if you don't. I've heard it. If you don't pay your tithes, you're gonna go to hell. I mean, I've heard people just straight up say that. I've heard, and you're talking about paying before taxes. I was there in the room when someone asked, like, should you pay tithes on gross or net? And they were like, well, do you want a gross blessing or a net blessing? was the response. It's just like, again, and I don't think anyone here is arguing that generosity is a bad thing. That should be part of the human experience.
Right.
It's the mandating, like the threat, the manipulation that comes with 10% comes to my organization. That's convenient.
Right. Yeah. Which if you're, and here's, I'll say this, like churches do a lot of good. And if you're a part of a church and you approve or appreciate the good that they do in the community or the good that you have received, I mean, by all means, support that church. Give 10, 20, 30%, whatever you want to give. Like I said, that's no different than if you're a part of a, Kiwanis Club or whatever, and you have to pay dues. I get that. Like, there's nothing wrong with that, supporting an organization. But it did, like you just said, it comes down to the threats. Whenever there are threats that people are afraid of, and you can use those threats to pull that money in, that's where it becomes manipulation. And I think that's where it becomes dangerous. Like, even if it's not hell, or even if they don't say the word curse or whatever, like I remember hearing stories about, like, well, I didn't pay my tithes, and then I got a flat tire, had to pay a new tire, and it turned out to be just 10% of what I would have had to pay in tithe. Like, that kind of stuff, which is, pure coincidence. And I'll say from my own personal experience, like, we tithe when we first got married for years, and then I quit tithing well before Chelsea. It was something she wanted to keep doing. Like, I probably quit maybe 8, 9 years ago. And then Chelsea, so I would tell her, like, I was like, I don't want to pay tithes out of my paycheck. So if you want to pay tithes, do it from your check. And that was fine for a while. She was a little worried that there might be, like, that would be a problem, like we'd be cursed or something. And but anyway, she eventually quit too. And we haven't had like these tragedies that have taken our money away or some kind of curses on our lives. The only difference is, I guess, we have like 10% more money to spend on a regular basis. There's not been all these fears that were ingrained into us happen.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And going back to my thought that I had, when I was giving, I felt like I was giving because I had to, not because I was wanting to. I almost felt like I was kind of being forced to give. So I felt like I was never giving out of the goodness of my heart.
Yeah.
I do remember times doing that, but and I understand.
And I think that's become the basis of American Christianity is fear. Like, do this or else. Yeah. In a lot of churches.
Yeah, and I understand them wanting to put that into me, to want to give and stuff like that. But also, I find myself feeling more happy when I'm able to help somebody in a different way than to, and I don't want to sound like I'm being greedy, because I'm really not. But, like, given money that I didn't have to be able to support myself, I'd rather give that in a different way and help people in other ways.
TJ said something once. He doesn't take credit for this, but I remember we were in the break room or in the back room standing at the time clock at Walmart, and we were talking about something about faith, and you said faith does not make up for irresponsibility. Like, if you're barely making it by and you're giving 10% of your way and they come and take your car, like, It's because you have to be responsible. Like, it's irresponsible not to pay your bills. It's irresponsible. You can't just give everything away and then be shocked whenever bad things happen.
Right.
Yeah.
What you want to say? You're sitting on something, Wood.
Nah, I mean, I agree with that. If you're not able to pay your bills, your landlord ain't gonna care. I mean,
Yeah.
or
You gave
the
it to the
bank
church.
if you have your car financed. Like that repo man, he don't care. He don't care if you're paying 10% to the church or whatever.
Yeah.
And no one is arguing against generosity. Like, Joanna and I have even had conversations about, because I didn't realize that I'm the newbie here. So we've only not been paying tithes. July will be 2 years since I've not been on staff as a pastor. And so we've had conversations and to come up with ideas about how to teach our kids to be generous. Like, I threw around the idea. We've not implemented any of them yet, so don't think we're special people or anything. But, like, should we alternate Christmas? Like, the boys get gifts one year, the next year we get gifts for another family. Stuff like that. Just, like, come up with ways to show them generosity, or to instill generosity in them, instead of this idea like you have to give this or else it has to be this amount.
Yeah, that's good.
Right. So let's talk about where some of these ideas come from, and then that'll get the conversation back on a. Then we can come back to what I'm saying is we can come back to this stuff. So what's the main verse that you hear preached when it comes to tithing?
The verse in Malachi.
Yep. I'll read it to you. KJV, baby. It says, "Will a man rob God? Question mark. Yet you have robbed me. But you say, wherein have we robbed thee? In tithes and offerings. Ye are cursed with a curse, for ye have robbed me, even this whole nation." Then it goes on to say, "Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house. And prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, and there shall not be room enough for you to receive it." So that's the main verse that we all grew up hearing. Will you rob God by not paying your tithes? And that makes it sound like a very big deal. There's a few other verses. Josh mentioned the first fruits. That comes from Proverbs 3 and verse 9. It says, "Honor the Lord with your first fruits of the increase of your wealth." Then you've got Leviticus, you've got Deuteronomy, Numbers, all those books of the law, so to speak, talk about the tenth going to the Levites, or the tenth going to, some of the tithes that they would pay would be like of their crops and their animals, like the herds, whatever they would produce.
It was almost never money. I think there's one law where it specifically mentions money. I was listening about this.
Yeah, there's one of them that says if you are too far away to get to the temple, then cash out your first 10% into money, and then you can send it on or take it. So these are all, Old Testament laws. It is always referring to a specific place in Israel where you're supposed to take the tithes, right? It's like the temple in Jerusalem. And then the Levites, because they didn't have a inheritance, so all the other tribes like Benjamin and Gad and Judah and all them, they had land, but you got the Levites didn't get any land, so what they received was 10% of everybody else's, so that they could have some inheritance too. We don't have any Levites today. And
exactly.
The idea was, I guess, is that they were priests doing the Lord's work, so that translates into preachers and church staff and stuff who are working at the church doing the Lord's work, so they should get 10%. I mean, I can see how they translate that. But
I would push back on that a little bit and
okay,
say
yeah,
that
play some devil's advocate here.
yeah, I would push back on that and say if you're gonna make the comparison that the Levites were the priests, Jesus in the new covenant is now the high priest, so it wouldn't
Right.
translate over to the pastors.
Okay,
I
yeah,
don't know,
so
maybe.
well, okay, but you make a point. Okay, so we could talk about the law and the Levites and all that. But before the law, Abraham gave 10% to Melchizedek, who was
Okay.
nobody knows anything about this guy. You know, he was just some priest
Some
who
guy that lives
appeared out of
forever.
nowhere. So in the New Testament, we hear or we read in Hebrews, they compare Melchizedek to Jesus and say that he was obviously greater than greater. And this is kind of weird. It says this in Hebrews. Melchizedek was greater than Levi because Abraham paid tithes to him, and Levi was inside Abraham at the time. So it's basically like Levi paying tithes. So Hebrews goes on about this, and it's not, Hebrews is not encouraging tithing at all. It's only encouraging the fact that we have a greater high priest now. So, you know, people could use that, but that's not in reference to tithing.
People do use that. So when the argument is that tithing is Old Testament, people will say, well, tithing predates the law, which
Mm-hmm.
is not really true because, yes, Abraham does give 10%, but he gives 10% of the stuff he just took from wiping out an entire village. He goes in and kills everybody and takes everything and then gives 10% of that to Melchizedek. It's not like it's costing him anything. And also,
Right.
circumcision predates the law, and no one is arguing that that's part of the New Testament.
Yeah, they used to. That was Paul's whole problem. Could never get these guys to quit wanting to get circumcised. Yeah, so let's go to the New Testament then. Does the New Testament teach us the tithe, or does it refute this idea of tithing? What do you think?
I think Paul certainly disagreed with tithing, or whoever the author of Corinthians was. That one's attributed to
Yes,
Paul.
Paul.
2 Corinthians 9, I think. I might have to look up the exact verbiage, but he basically says, give the amount that you see fit. Am I wrong?
Yeah, purpose in your heart.
Yeah. And so there's three things: cheerful, be a cheerful giver, give consistently, and give sacrificially, are like his three things that the guidelines he gives.
Yes. So yeah, that would be my thoughts about the circumcision thing. In the New Testament, I don't remember which book. It may be Romans. Could be wrong. But Paul
Circumcise the heart.
argues, yes. So circumcision for Christians is of the heart. So he's arguing against following the law and getting circumcised because now it's a heart thing. And with circumcision predating the law and the only other thing, tithing, I think he's making that same point in 2 Corinthians 9, like you talked about, to basically
Give from the
decide what
heart.
you want to give in your heart. Give from your heart. He
Yeah.
says, do not do it under compulsion or fear or obligation, like Joe Allen was talking about. I mean, he specifically says, do not do it for that reason. Do not give out of fear or obligation, but give cheerfully. God loves a cheerful giver. So, what are we doing when we're teaching kids to give and these kids don't want to give?
I feel like they still are kind of preaching that, but they're doing it as the offering plate is passing by you. So
Yeah.
you know,
Or they changed the context from tithes in that case to offerings. So you got tithes and offerings.
Right.
So they say you give tithes. You just have to do that. That's a rule you have to follow. Which Paul makes it pretty clear. Christians are not under the law anymore. Several verses talk about that. I mean, you could just go to Galatians and read the whole. He goes on a whole spiel about that. We're not under the law. We're not obligated to follow the law. So we are to give cheerfully, not out of obligation.
Right.
And I don't think he sees any distinction in tithes or offerings in that case.
Yeah. Well, back to your
It's just giving.
teaching the kids.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Josh?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's doing exactly what that verse is saying not to do. I mean, you're instilling fear in them, and I mean, exactly what that verse says not to do.
Right. That's the opposite of what I mean. If you're living your life based off of what Paul's saying in the Bible, you're doing the opposite when you're teaching young people to tithe.
I guess to be
There
fair,
is.
though, I don't
Go
remember
ahead.
anything from like a kid. I mean, it was probably like upper teens before before I distinctly remember all the curses and everything.
Yeah,
Like
I mean, I remember
16.
being a kid hearing if I made $1, I had to give a dime,
Oh, I mean, yeah, but I'm talking about like the
like for
curse
fear.
or you're
Yeah, yeah.
robbing God. Yeah.
Maybe. I don't. I mean, yeah, I don't remember how
I mean,
early
I'm
it
sure
actually.
there's churches out there that are.
Oh yeah, for sure. Um. So Jesus does mention tithing, and I have heard this as a defense for tithing in the New Testament. So he's talking to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They're like the religious leaders at the time. And what he's doing, he's condemning them. He's just pointing out the fact that how, ridiculous they are. He says, it's in Matthew, and I think it may be in Luke too. I think this conversation happens in both of them. But he talks about how the Pharisees would tithe like all these little plants that they grow, like mint and herbs and all this stuff. But then they would overlook like helping poor people or whatever.
Justice. Yeah.
Yeah, overlook justice. And then he goes on to say, you should have done both, basically. So people take that and say, oh, see, Jesus is saying you should tithe. But then I guess Paul's argument then is Jesus is living before the new covenant, right? Because he's talking to people who are following the law in Jerusalem. Of course, he's telling them to tithe. That's part of the law. But after Jesus dies, Christians are no longer under the law. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I just think the whole two covenant thing is really problematic. It causes
Yeah, it's
a lot of
confusing.
confusion.
It does. Yeah. I guess my point for bringing that up would be that, again, like we have talked about in the past, there's room for disagreement among Christians. Like you can still be a Christian and not agree that paying tithes is a responsibility of Christianity, of a Christian.
100%.
So I
I
don't
mean,
think you. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think ultimately the only thing that you in Christianity that you would not be able to disagree on is the resurrection. I think anything else is up for opinion. But I mean, if Jesus wasn't resurrected, then everything is kind of for naught.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like any episode that we've covered so far, hell, authority, whatever, I think there's room for discussion within Christianity for those.
Yeah, I agree. I think you have to have these conversations, and the problem happens when somebody is so bound to an opinion or so bound to a belief that they have been taught that when anybody questions that, You're
questioning them.
They react.
Up in their identity.
Right. They react like you are offending them or you're attacking them. That's what like. I'll see people just. It happens on Facebook all the time. Somebody will post uh, an opinion or a belief that they have. Somebody, pushes back on it, and then they feel like they're getting attacked. They'll delete or block somebody, or go off, insulting the person for attacking them when all that person's doing is pushing back on a questionable belief. And I think pastors do that whenever somebody challenges tithing. That's their source of income. That's how the church runs, stays open. They're gonna push back against somebody who's questioning that idea.
But I understand that. It's for keeping the lights on.
Mm-hmm.
But not even 100 years ago, technically we is when we first started getting electricity. I mean, we could still go out under a pole barn and have church. You don't need lights.
Yeah, absolutely.
Technically,
and church is not even close to the same. Obviously, I mean, I think the apostles would get a kick out of, we've got a music pastor, an executive pastor, a senior citizen pastor. Oh, we got a young adults pastor. We got a kids pastor. We got an assistant to these pastors. Like the list is never ending of the amount of pastors.
Yeah.
It's just more money that's needed.
Right. I think the idea that supporting the institution that the church has become with all its bills and necessities and stuff I think that is almost laughable compared to what you see in the New Testament. You don't see that. You don't.
It's reversed.
People, right? The poor people in the church shouldn't be the ones being encouraged to pay tithes. The church should be paying them. That's how the New Testament functioned. These guys pretty consistently sold everything and supported the poor. I mean, yes, they had to be supported themselves because, like I said, they sold everything. They didn't have anything. So it was the responsibility of other believers to help each other. It was a very, you scratch my back, whatever, I scratch yours kind of lifestyle, where everybody's poor and supporting each other. All right, so I guess the point of this entire conversation was, it's okay to push back against that idea. Don't. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Bible clearly says, don't give out of compulsion. So don't feel like you have to give out of fear. One of the big things is that's what drives me crazy when preachers will talk about you can be a Christian and be cursed. Like, that seems completely against the Bible because Paul says that Jesus became a curse for us. So you're basically saying that him taking on that curse was not enough. You can also be cursed, even though you're under the, sacrifice of Jesus, which makes no sense. So you can be cursed, even though Jesus is basically your substitution. He's representing you, right? He represents your righteousness as a Christian. So how can you be cursed if you're under that umbrella, I guess? That doesn't make sense if you're going with this whole New Testament. The evangelical doctrine, anyway. All right, so anyway, let's move on from the Bible talk. Do you think pastors should concern themselves with the financial information of their members, people who attend their church?
No, it has nothing to do with that.
Yeah, I
Okay.
agree. I mean, I think, I mean, if we're talking like I know I can speak from the last church that I was on staff at, that they have an outside organization. They have like an accounting firm handle all of that. So none of the pastors have any idea what anybody gives or anything.
Hmm.
And then if you attend the church that we go to, you get access to Ramsey Plus and things like that. Like they're intentional about helping people become better with their money, and that's something that I really appreciate. But as far as like if like pastors know who gives what and stuff like that, I think that I think it's impossible to not let that affect how you lead, and not let that affect your
Mm-hmm.
decision making, and and things like that.
Right. And to me, it's, I have heard stories of people who have been told they couldn't teach Sunday school, told they couldn't sing in the choir, told they couldn't uh, take on any form of leadership role because they obviously weren't paying their tithes. And to me, that raises the question of like, why, like, what concern is it of anybody else? I think Jesus even says, in the Sermon on the Mount, he's like, when you give, don't even let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. So if our giving is to be that discreet anyway, what gives leaders, pastors, or any sort of spiritual authority the um, audacity, I guess you could say, to
Yeah, that's a good word.
judge what their members are giving, or what, even some organizations, I mean, like they'll take the 10% out of your check like it's a tax, which brings me back to like the whole Israel thing. Like they didn't have taxes set up as a nation. The tithe was essentially their tax. Like we pay taxes to our government, right? Israel paid taxes to, the temple, which was essentially their government. I mean, it was a tax. Like, why are we bringing that into um, this new covenant, which has nothing to do with the nation of Israel? So, anyway,
I'm surprised it hasn't went up from 10% yet to something higher.
inflation on tithing.
God needs some more.
All right. Well, how can people avoid being manipulated in their giving?
Yeah, I
Good
think
question.
we've hit on this in the spiritual authority episode. It's just having that filter, having those boundaries. Like your money is your business. I mean, if you go to someone for advice, I mean, and you want to be that open, I mean, that's your decision. But I think you know your finances better than anyone. You know what you can afford. Just be as generous as you can, and if your finances increase, then let your generosity increase. I think you just do the best with what you have available. Don't let anyone use fear or manipulation to coerce something out of you.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I'd say ask yourself some questions. Like when you're reaching for your checkbook or that cash, like ask yourself what is my motivation here? Why am I doing this? If it's because you're scared, or if it's because you feel like all this pressure, um, I don't think like here's the thing about giving in situations, like a lot of times church situations are very emotionally intense. Like there could be like music playing and the pastor's talking really fast and he's talking about giving and how you need to just let God, move you right now. I don't think God is not going to be mad at you if you take a second and say, "Hey, this is too much going on right now. I'm gonna think this through." Like, I've been in services that they're trying to get you to like give a lot, you know, up the ante. Like, how much can you give? If take a second to step back.
I
God's
think
not
we've
going to
all been in
be
that same service.
God's not going to be mad at you for taking, holding off on that Sunday night service and saying, let me think, let me look at my finances, see what I can afford here, and if I got it, I'll send a check in on Monday morning. Like, don't
I have
let
a
the
funny story about
emotion
that.
and stuff. Oh, I got some stories too where, golly, we gave away. Could have bought some. We gave a lot of money because of situations like
doing
that.
we were doing a missions. I was the one doing it. I was the pastor, and I was doing that, amping it up. Take a moment, think about what God's put on your heart. It was to students, to kids, middle and high schoolers. And this kid comes up after service, and he's like, man, I was praying. He's like, how do you know that when God puts on your heart to give? And I was like, I mean, how much money you can get, like what's possible. And I was like, you don't have to do like something that's safe. I was like, you can do something that you would have to work hard for. And he's like, because the only number that kept coming to my mind was 500,000. And I was just like, okay, well, we might want to go a little lower.
Kids
It's
say
funny,
the dumbest
man.
things.
Like, and I've given into it, where you're just like they're talking and the music's playing and they're like, what is God putting on your heart right now? And then obviously everybody sitting there, they're gonna think of a number, and it may be like a little higher than. It depends where your mind's at. Like in situations like that, I would always think like $200. Like, oh, crap, I got to get $200. Like, like I thought that was, you know, everybody's going to think of something. That doesn't mean it's God telling you to give that amount of money. Like, don't give in to the pressure and the emotion of the moment. Take a step back. Look, like Josh said, don't use faith as an excuse for irresponsibility. Because you've got kids, you may have kids to feed, you may have bills to pay. That stuff, you need to make sure you got covered.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So anyway, like I was saying, ask some questions. Question yourself. What's your motives? Um, look at a budget, or ask yourself if you can afford this. It drives me insane. I wish we could pull up that clip that I sent you the other day, Josh, of that pastor. He's talking about like, even if you are poor and someone has given you money to help you out, how you need to be tithing off of that. As he's sitting up there in a $600 suit, and it's
Probably cruising
it
around the
gets out of
Escalade.
control. What is it?
Said he's probably cruising around in an Escalade.
Oh yeah, dude's flying in a jet. Kenneth Copeland.
Yeah.
So
That's it. And I think that's the extreme end of the spectrum, right? Is the prosperity gospel. Like you're talking about manipulation and being taken advantage of. Like it's just unbelievable some of the stuff they say. I was listening to some clips this morning just about how heaven's closed up. Like if you're not giving financially, God's not going to hear your prayers, and just all kinds of stuff.
yeah, that's some wild stuff, and it's unfortunate people get wrapped up in that. Man, I remember Dad getting. Remember when mine and Josh's dad got some stupid letter in the mail, and it looked handwritten. It may have been handwritten, and this guy he was just going on about buying like a
Was
little.
it
It was a
water?
little. It was like, yeah, water. I don't remember. Maybe it had some glitter
Polar
in it,
water?
and it was supposed to be like from heaven, which me and Josh clearly knew it was absolutely ludicrous. But our dad, who had probably been praying for some financial help or something, got this letter, and it was talking about like if he gave so much, then he was going to get all this blessing and all this money, and he was taking it serious. I remember him asking us about it, and I was like, he was wanting to try to figure out how to pay so much money, so because he thought, this is God answering my prayer, and that kind of stuff is obviously, you know, just terrible people taking advantage of people.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other end of the spectrum, just with tithing, uh, using fear is no better. I would say that telling people they're going to go to hell because they're not paying tithes, telling people they're going to be cursed, making up stories about in the Bible and twisting the meaning of them, saying
Well,
Yeah.
people got killed. I mean,
I
that's just
mean,
as bad.
even just telling people that if you give, you're going to be blessed. Like you don't control that. Like them telling
Yeah.
them, like you know,
Yeah, you know they're
I mean,
basing it
because
off
I'm
of,
sure
of
I'm sure a lot of
Bible
people
verses.
are giving because they think they're going to be blessed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
I
they're looking
remember.
for it.
Mm-hmm. I remember you've mentioned in a previous episode Sermon Index, and I went on there,
Mm-hmm.
and the tithing conversation got out of control on there. It would get shut down a lot. But I remember starting one about tithing, and this dude posted all these testimonies of people. I don't know if it was people he knew or where he got them from, but it was just all these stories about stories you would never hear from the pulpit, like people losing their house, having to file for bankruptcy. Um, I mean, my algorithm's all jacked up on TikTok with deconstruction stuff right now. There's a guy on there that talks about how he's going to have to work till he's 90 years old. He has no retirement because he gave all his money away to his church. And just nobody ever talks about those stories where people's lives have just been turned upside down.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, that's not something you're going to hear, in the community because I don't, it's a whole, I don't know, we'll edit that entire thing I just
Yeah,
said
man. I
out
mean,
because
it's
I'm
easy to
going
say.
nowhere
It's
with it.
easy to say. It's easy to look at that and say, like, I mean, that's dumb. Why? I mean, why would you give your money away? But when you have this belief, you're being told you're going to be blessed or you're going to be cursed if you don't. Um, that manipulation, that fear. I mean, it's real. Perception is
Yeah,
reality.
it's a one-way street then, because then you only have to
It's a,
give.
yeah, your mindset affects a lot of that because that makes it a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because I got an example. So I remember this is from Chelsea. She was going to church in Panama City at the time, and it was the whole thing. The last of the service was like, you know, really emotional. Give whatever you can, and she said she had $20 in her pocket, and she really didn't want to give it, but she felt, was feeling that pressure. But she ended up leaving service, not giving the $20. They go to out to eat at a restaurant. She locks her keys in her car, so she has to call Papa Lock to come. And the guy comes, pops her lock, and she's like, what's the bill? And he's like, don't worry about it. Just give me $20. And she said, and that stuck with her deep, because she had already heard these other things. So in her mind, that was God taking that money away from her that she was supposed to give in church. And but I told her, I was like, wow, look at this. If you would have gave that $20 and then that guy, then you locked your keys in your car, you wouldn't have had no money to pay the guy.
Yeah,
So
$20 in debt.
flip it around. I mean, but perception, like you said, it's everything. It's reality. And if you're constantly thinking, man, God's going to get money out of me somehow, if you're constantly living with that fear, you're going to see that. If you're constantly living with, hey, I'm blessed, I'm working hard,
You're going to see that.
like, yeah, I haven't paid tithes, in years. Here I am. I'm not having a bunch of crazy stuff happen. Watch something crazy happen, and then everybody's gonna be like, "Hey,"
Yeah.
But, so anyway, final thoughts. What'd you think,
I was
Joe?
just gonna say, like, even them preaching on not necessarily that money is bad, but like don't idolize money, stuff like that. But then every service they're pushing to give your money to them.
Mm-hmm. That could open up a whole nother conversation here. Yeah, so the Gospels, at least the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are very poverty. Not having money is very virtuous. The rich man shall not enter heaven. Like, it's basically impossible. Jesus tells a story about the eye of the needle. Like, it'd be harder for a camel to pass through an eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven, which is essentially he's saying it's impossible. Now, they've
Easier
taken
for
this
a camel
story.
to enter the eye of a needle.
Yeah, it'd be easier for a camel. So he's basically saying it's impossible for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, people have taken this and they've said, hey, there's some place in Jerusalem that's called the Eye of the Needle, and everybody's got to take, you got to take the bags off the camel for it to go through. And that's what he was talking about. But that's completely ludicrous and made up. So, money in the New Testament, or at least in the apocalyptic literature, which views the devil as basically in charge of this world. And if you're rich,
yeah, doesn't it?
Yeah. If you're rich, if you're wealthy, you must be working with the devil. So, poverty, meekness, all those things are virtues in that case.
Yeah, it gives the beatitude a different meaning when you understand that context.
Right. So.
Yeah.
So, anyways,
as far as final thoughts,
go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, we're not trying to tell you or push you to not tithe. Just,
no. Just don't be scared. Not to.
Every one of these episodes, we're not pushing you to turn from God or pushing you away from God. That's not what we're doing. But as far as tithing, be smart. If you've got $100 to last you the rest of the week until you get paid again, don't give $75 to the offering.
Yeah. Make smart decisions.
Yeah.
Don't let fear or we're not saying this stuff to try to bash the Bible. We're not. People have said we're trying to steer people away from God. We're certainly not trying to do that. We're trying to help you to get out from under the fear that might be binding your life. And it's possible because we have done it ourselves. It's okay to challenge ideas that are being pressured on you. You don't have to swallow everything you're told. And that's what Joe Allen's saying with giving. If you only have $100 in your pocket and the preacher's telling you to give 50 in faith, you don't have to do that. You can make your own decisions. It's not going to be a curse or be the end of you.
Yeah, absolutely. I say the same thing. Just be smart. I would say be generous, but you know, just this set.
Help people out.
You have to give 10% or else. Like, just your finances better than anyone.
Yeah.
So you just be smart, be generous, and find an organization that you trust. That so you're not just throwing your money away when you do give.
All right, if you guys want to make a donation, it's Holy Chef Pod.
With that being said,
see you guys later.
Be sure to follow us on all social media at Holy Shift Pod.